Hi folks, so I want to tell the story of my favorite tree, my Mikawa Yatsubusa Japanese maple, which I have had now for 11 years, coming up on 12 years in June. And I love this tree. This is one of my first bonsai trees, and I've been taking pictures of it now for the last decade, and I want to share those pictures and some thoughts of things I learned as I took care of this tree. So I have the pictures right here, and I'm gonna step through them and share my thoughts. So when I got this tree, it was a pre-bonsai. I got it at a nursery near my house, well, somewhat near my house, that specializes in Japanese maples, especially Japanese maple pre-bonsai. And I remember the nursery owner took me around his nursery, showed me all sorts of trees, and this one really stood out to me, and I immediately liked it. And I think maybe it was just the tight internodes of the Mikawa Yatsubusa. And it came in this bonsai pot. I probably paid a little much for it, but in the seller's defense, it was a healthy tree. It had been in training for a few years, so he had put some work and time into it. So it was a pre-bonsai. And I remember the time I didn't really necessarily want to do bonsai. I wanted to have a bonsai, and I love Japanese maples, so when I went to the nursery, I said, hey, I want a Japanese maple bonsai tree. So that's how it started. And I didn't know much about bonsai at the time. This was a decade ago. And so I remember one thing I didn't know was, for instance, about grafts. So this tree, you can see this arrow here, is grafted. And the graft union is where the arrow is pointing. So a graft, for those of you who don't know, and a lot of these Japanese maple varieties, maybe even most of them, are grafted, meaning that the bottom part of the tree is just standard generic Japanese maple rootstock, and the top is then the specific variety. In this case, it's a Mikawa Yatsubusa that has been grafted onto the bottom of the tree. And they do that because often the top or the growth of these cultivars is weaker than the growth from a standard Japanese maple. And I think that's true. My standard Japanese maple that I have as a bonsai, it grows much more strongly than this Mikawa Yatsubusa. I didn't know at the time that a graft is often considered a bad trait for a tree. Often in bonsai, people look for plants that are not grafted. But this graft has not bothered me over the years. I've had it a decade now, and I can see the graft. You can see kind of a bump there, but it doesn't bother me. So I think you can still make good bonsai with grafted plants. But it does help. Not all grafts are created equal. Some grafts are done really well, some aren't done well. Some start out looking fine, and then as the tree ages, the graft starts to become more and more apparent because of the different grape throats between the top growth and the bottom growth. But anyways, in this case, the graft does not seem to bother, and you'll see through this progression that the graft doesn't really change much. It looks about the same today, maybe even better than it looked at the time of purchasing the tree. So at the time that I got this tree, it was living on my porch of my apartment. It got morning sun and afternoon shade, and it did pretty well in those conditions. I'll step through here. So this is now that same year I got it, but in October, and I was pleased to see the great orangish, reddish fall color that I got on the tree. And we'll step through again. Here is 2 years later, so 2 years after getting the tree in April, and still living on the porch, still in that same pot. I didn't repot it for a few years because it didn't seem to need it, and it's doing well. The leaves on when it didn't get full sun or very little morning sun really, and a lot of shade, the leaves are pretty big, but it still grew just fine in those conditions. This one really surprised me when I saw this. So this is my sweet toddler put these giraffes in the tree, and what surprised me, not that he did that, but that I was fine with that because now I know that the branches of this Mikawa Yatsubusa grow so slowly that, if he broke off a branch, he was just a toddler, it would have been years to replace that, So I'm surprised I let him play in this tree, because since then, unfortunately, I've gotten a little more careful, especially with this tree. Almost exclusive with this tree, because I know the branches develop so slowly. But yeah, he put a giraffe in the tree. Yeah, anyway. I kind of consider it his tree though, so maybe that's why I was okay with it. All right, so now a year later, April 2016, this is the sad phase of the tree. So it's starting to not look great, and you know, my goal when I got this, I can't remember if I said at the beginning, but my goal was simply to keep the tree alive. That was the goal. And so I thought, oh no, 3 years in, like my tree, it's not looking so good. I think I'm almost sure part of this, here it is again in 2017. I wasn't really taking many pictures. I think maybe I was just busy as a parent of young kids at this time, just kind of surviving. So I am convinced though, and this is a big message and takeaway I have for this progression. I've already shared it. One of my first videos that I made about bonsai soil is I think a big reason why this tree started to get sad during this time, you know, 3-4 years into having it, was because I decided, okay, it'd been a few years, I need to repot this tree. And so I repotted it in potting soil, and I think I put some grit in there, maybe I put some pumice in, and then the man who I purchased the tree from, he told me, you know, to put some sand in the potting mix. And I think what he maybe should have told me was put some gravel, because I didn't understand what he meant by sand. I think sand is fine if it's coarse grained maybe, but I understood sand to be like sand from a beach or sand for, you know, kids' sandboxes. So I think I went to Walmart. I bought some very, very, very fine-grained sand and mixed it in with the potting soil and with a little bit of pumice, I think maybe. But it was a pretty dense soil mix. And at that time, I just didn't really believe in bonsai soil. I know I'd read it and seen it, but I'm like, you know, plants, they can't grow in gravel, or they won't grow well in gravel. It needs some organic material. It needs some, you know, potting soil. So I planted it in potting soil, and I think that's what made it sad. So my big recommendation, the big takeaway message from this video is just use bonsai soil for at least Japanese maples. Anyways, you'll see as I go. So jump forward all the way. Again, I was just busy being a parent of young kids. I didn't take pictures for a few years of this tree. So now we're all the way to 2021, October. And this is when I started doing some stuff. So first off, I repotted it into bonsai soil. And then second off, some of the branches being really long and leggy, I'd kind of done a little bit of trimming on the tips over the years. But this is where I made some big changes. So here's some arrows. So the arrow right on the top there, I actually wired down the apex a little bit because it was getting, there was kind of like a space in between the top of the tree and the rest of the tree that I didn't like aesthetically. So I took some wire, wired it down a little bit. Then the arrow there on the left, that's actually some styling by nature that was not intended. There was a hailstorm, and I remember, I can't remember if I was inside or if I rushed home, but it started to hail, and all my trees were fine in the hailstorm. Some of them got some hail damage. We put them under while it was hailing. But this tree, I think this is the only tree, again, these branches, probably a branch that had been growing for a few years, hail just took it out, right in a spot where I wanted a branch too. So I was really sad about that. Then these two branches here on the right that are just stubs, I cut those in late spring because they had just grown way out because I hadn't been doing much pruning on it. So I took them way back, and I was a little alarmed because I cut them back pretty hard and was hoping, you know, okay, if I come back hard in the spring, late spring, maybe I'll get a second flush. But again, another thing I've shared about this tree is basically, for me, a single flush tree. I get one flush of growth in the spring. You know, it extends out, makes maybe 6, 8, 10 internodes, and then that's it. And that's it for the year. So I cut it back, and I just had these ugly stubs the rest of the year. And I was kind of a little apprehensive because first the hail damage, I thought, man, I wanted a branch there, now it's gone. And then again, I cut these stubs back. I'm like, oh man, maybe I lost these branches because they're not going to no buds will be activated on them. And they weren't activated that year. But I thought, even if I lose those branches, it'll maybe be okay. Anyway, so here it is in 2022 in March, after I've repotted it. I can't remember what year exactly I repotted it. I think it was in 2021 or 2020 into real bonsai soil. And then I was thrilled. All right, here's April 2022. I was thrilled because those stubs I was just talking about, those branches that I took way back, I had all sorts of buds come out on them. So even though the branch was bare for a whole growing season after pruning it, finally that next growing season it started to grow there. And there's still that big space from the hail damage, but there's nothing I can do about that. So now, 2022, this is where, I drew my little happy face here. This is where things are starting to look up for this tree again. And a lot of that is due to, again, putting in bonsai soil, but also just because this time during COVID, I really got into bonsai and started watching bonsai again, started getting really into it and learning stuff. Here's what the new spring growth looks like. I love this tree in the spring. Fall color is great, but the spring growth is just awesome. I love the bright green leaves and then the red sheaths. The contrast of those two is just awesome. So here it is in April 2022, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm happy again. It's looking good. I'm proud of it, and it seems to be doing well. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna keep this tree alive. It's still alive. I've had it for almost a decade now. And here it is again in more summer growth. So that really bright green color of the Mikawa Yatsubusa that comes out in spring, it deepens over the summer, especially if you put in shade. Obviously you'll get deeper green, but it goes to a more deeper green. And so this arrow right here that I drew on 2022 August, so throughout the years, even before this time, I had been pruning it a little bit just to keep it in shape. If I did no prune on this, it would be much bigger than it was. So I would basically just prune the tips a little bit to keep it in kind of a ball shape is what I was going for. And another thing about this tree is I would prune the base here. You can see that the extension is really not on the top of the tree, but on the sides, because this variety is of Japanese maple is basally dominant, meaning it's not apically dominant. So I didn't really prune the top too much. I never prune the top on this tree much. It's usually on the sides that I'm always cutting it back to. And here it is in that November of 2022, and you can see I had pruned off that side branch there to keep it compact. But it's looking a lot more fuller now than it was a few years ago. It's doing well. And here's a close-up of some of that leaf color. I often, with this tree, I don't get great fall color. I've gotten good fall color on it, but I'd say half the time the leaves are pretty crispy and the fall colors don't really pop. Other half the time it does get quite red and orange. All right, oh, this is nice. I love, like I said, I mean, look at that. I love this tree. So here it is, 2023, a couple years ago, April, and you can see the new emerging spring leaves that are bright green against the contrast of the red sheaths. And I love this tree. I love Japanese maples. Just a great tree. And here it is a couple months later in May 2023, and it's looking full, it's looking healthy, and still enjoying the tree. Here's a close-up of those leaves. And the leaves have reduced in size, I've noticed. I mean, obviously just keeping in some, but I think also as it's gotten more buds on it, more ramified, the leaves have definitely reduced quite a bit. But the Mikawa Yatsubusa doesn't really have small leaves. I mean, they're pretty large, really, but the inner nodes, of course, are really what I think people love about this tree, being a dwarf. The inner nodes are super, super tight. And here it is in a fall, again, early fall. This is September. Not great color yet, but maybe, oh, you know, this is one of the years. So 2023, I did get pretty good fall color on it. This is probably the best fall color I've ever gotten on it, I think. And I'm a little past peak with it, but yeah, looking really cool. All right, and then here is just a year ago, April 2024, again, at my favorite time of year where I photograph it the most. And you can see I changed the pot in 2024. I actually bought this pot, this green pot, for another Japanese maple, my other one, just my standard Japanese maple. But when I held this pot up to this tree, I changed my mind and I thought, I want to put this tree in this pot. And it's a little deep for it, but this tree, again, sticking back with my first goal when I got this tree over a decade ago, was simply keep it alive, keep it healthy. And I purposely thought, you know, why not have a bigger, deeper pot? Because if anything, that'll just help the tree be more vigorous and more healthy. So I don't plan to put this in a smaller pot. This is basically it. Maybe eventually, but I like the contrast of the light green with this greenish pot, and really just like the color of the pot. And you can see over the years too, again, looking at that graft, I think the graft has maybe actually gotten a little bit better. I can still see it. Doesn't bother me at all. I've been looking at this tree now for a decade, and it is what it is. I'm not going to do anything drastic to it. The root base is not great. It is what it is, but I still love it. And here's a close-up of the fall, or not fall, the spring leaves in April with the red sheaths. And here it is just a few days later, about a week later, when more of the leaves have filled out. When the leaves are really still small and fresh, but are a little bit bigger. And this is really when this tree shines, is in April. So I'm loving it. All right, so that's it. That was the 10-year or 11-year progression of this tree. And again, the big takeaway I shared in the middle is use bonsai soil with Japanese maples. I highly recommend it. And maybe even not bonsai soil, but at least a really fast draining soil. They like drainage. And I think my tree really suffered when it was growing in a container with potting soil. And I'm going to call this a success too. I want to, you know, important to celebrate successes. So my goal getting this tree was keep it alive. And I've done that. I've done that for 11 years. And, you know, the goal obviously is another decade, another 2 decades. I mean, really, these can live to be 100 years old, maybe. Maybe older, I don't know. Is it gonna live to be 100? I mean, realistically, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things working against bonsai. Just, you know, some missed waterings. Say I go on vacation and my sprinkler system fails. That could be it, you know, or an insect disease. You know, stuff can happen. But, you know, even if this tree dies, it's a success. I feel I've succeeded. I've kept it alive for a decade, hope for another decade, but it's been really fun taking care of this tree. I still love looking at it, and I hope for many more years to come with this tree. Anyways, with that, I'll end this, and until next time, happy bonsaiing.